So next, it's my great honor to introduce Phil Washington, who is the CEO for LA Metro, the Los Angeles County Metropolitan Transportation Authority. And Phil's bio is very impressive. It is very intimidating. And it is also very available on Google. So I do not want to, Stephanie, I do not want to read it out while I'm up here, except to note a few of his accomplishments and then share a story about Phil. So, you know, his career of service really started. Phil and I have, we both have Mississippi roots, but Phil actually grew up here in the south side of Chicago, so he's very happy to be home. He spent a career in the Army before he ever got into transportation, and he achieved the rank of Command Sergeant Major, which is the highest non-commissioned rank that you can achieve in the Army. He went on to work for Denver, got the Fast Tracks program off the ground, implemented the first P3 for a major transit line in the country, and he was actually on the host committee for the Democratic National Convention in 2008 in Denver, which, little known fact, is one of the very first places that bike share launched in the country. So Phil has been a longtime champion for cities, for transit, for biking, and what he's done at LA Metro is no less impressive in a very short period of time. Got an evergreen 1-cent sales tax passed, and has continued to impress everybody in a highly political and very challenging environment to be successful. One of the other things Phil has long been a champion for is minority transportation officials, the group COMTO that sort of recognizes mentors and pulls folks together who are working in that field. A few things that you will not read in Phil's bio, though. One, Phil loves jazz, but he hates Broadway musicals, which I will slowly but surely break him of. Second, you won't ever see him on a bike in a suit. We have a little informal game of LA transportation bingo, and in there, if you catch Phil on a bike in a suit, you pretty much get blackout and you win the game. Something else that I plan to slowly but surely break him of. But one of the things that I wanted to mention is the first time I met Phil was at the LA Metro's Bike to Work Month. And this was a huge event in the Bay Area where I had come from, but Los Angeles does it a little different. They do a whole month, and it's really Metro's event. It's really, they're the lead, they do the funding. And so I had shown up at the event, very excited to meet Phil, but I also wanted to be respectful and deferential, so I was sort of standing over off. I was in the shot, but I was sort of standing off to the side, and Phil looked around and said, no, you come up here and you stand next to me in front. And right then, even though given the state of biking in Los Angeles now, he may have been throwing my body in front of him to take the bullets. But I think what he was actually doing is demonstrating things about his character that he has shown to be true over and over again after that. That he is truly invested in allyship and partnership. That he wants to lift people up, that he wants to bring people together, that he gets respect by giving respect. And that spirit of true partnership is why I'm so excited by what we have already accomplished in Los Angeles under his leadership and what we are going to accomplish in the near future. So without further ado, Phil Washington.
Well, thank you to Salita. Is Salita high energy or what? Absolutely. She's fantastic. Let me just talk for a little while because I want to keep you all on schedule. But I do want to mention my big brother here, Dorval Carter, who runs CTA, a great friend, great professional. I guess maybe 6 months ago, the two largest transportation agencies, the three largest transportation agencies in the country are New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles, of course. And before Tom Pendergast resigned, all three of those agencies were run by guys from Chicago. I'm just saying. And so great to see Dorval Carter here. It's wonderful to be back here in the city of Chicago. Listen, leading cities into the future, which is the theme of this portion of this segment, and it's really, really true. When we talk about the improvements that are going on here in Chicago, I am just so happy to be here. I grew up on the south side of Chicago. Now here's the L train. And this was our family car when I was growing up. And on this public transportation, I got to tell you the story of me having to go across town. I'm from the south side. My first girlfriend was on the west side. Now, I had to go to the west side on public transportation to see her, and that was tough. But going on the west side to see my first girlfriend, the public transportation was my way to get there. It is a lifeline to people all over this city. As Dorval talked about, 1.7 million rides, 1.6 million rides per day, right? We're about to overtake you in Los Angeles, though, my man, as we build out our system. But as I saw this infrastructure being built in my neighborhood on the south side of Chicago, I saw all the infrastructure going up, and I saw people working on infrastructure in my community, and they did not look like me. And so the idea and the value of something like local hire is huge. And I wanted to mention that because I didn't realize then, but I started to see the tie between transportation infrastructure investment and economic development, and how transportation impacts the lives of so many people. When you talk about moving 1.6 million people a day, we are the connection, and we are the socio-economic enabler for so many people going to school, going to medical appointments, going to work all over this city. And so the whole idea of transportation and jobs and safer places to walk and bike is so very, very important. And I would say that if we deliver a lot of these great innovative projects faster, and if we leave our poorest communities and neighborhoods behind, then we have failed. I grew up in public housing, a place called Argyll Gardens that is on 130th, and I'm always talking to Dorval about the extension of the Red Line to that community. And that has been talked about for the last 50 years. And I'm happy to see it's moving, I believe. And so that is a fantastic thing. This is what we're dealing with in Los Angeles. The congestion that is really mind-boggling. We are working to improve that. A year ago, our citizens gave us, as Salita was mentioning, a resounding vote of support on the passage of what is called Measure M. 71% approval by the voters to build transportation infrastructure in LA County, the most populous county in America, almost 11 million people in one county. See, I remember back in the day when Cook County was the largest county in America. LA County, almost 11 million people. This Measure M was developed through a bottoms-up process where we did not just sit in the building and decide how we would implement projects and what projects would be done. This bottoms-up process is us going out to the 9 subregions in LA County and asking them to identify and prioritize their own projects. We gave them dollar targets, of course, and we ended up with a plan that is pretty amazing. Now, I don't expect you all to see all of this. This is LA County The blue is highway because we're also responsible for highway improvements as well. And the green is transit projects. 40 major projects in the next 40 years. 18 projects in the next 15 years. A massive program that will generate $120 billion over the first 40 years with no sunset to the tax. And so we are working along with all of you because we all are working on the same things, right? We all are working and leading our cities into the future. And so this whole Measure M is more than just the projects, though. It's a comprehensive plan that really looks at operations, really looks at state of good repair and asset management, looks at keeping fares affordable for students, for the disabled, for seniors, looks at bikes and pedestrian connections, looks at returning money back to the cities through what is called local return. So those local communities can do their own sidewalks and potholes and streets. And so this is a very, very comprehensive plan. We listened to the people as we developed this plan. The whole idea of building and reaching out to the community to build all these projects, we like to talk about how it is leaving an infrastructure inheritance. All of the people in this room, I think our infrastructure forefathers would be happy with what we're doing. Because I like to say, have been on an infrastructure vacation in this country for the last 3 or 4 decades. And so as many more people come back to the cities, I was reading something not long ago that talked about how in the next 25, 30 years, 80% of the world's population will be in urban cores or cities. Now, our infrastructure is not prepared to accommodate all of the people coming back to the cities. But what we're doing in this room and how we're preparing our workforce will become very, very important. At LA Metro, where we have 10,000 employees, 40% of those employees are eligible for retirement in the next 3 years. 40%. Another 70% are over the age of 40. We absolutely need a trained workforce to build the next generation of transportation infrastructure in this country. Opportunities for at-risk youth. Currently, only 45% of foster youths in LA County graduate from high school. Some of the things we are looking to do is put together a career pathway, a pipeline, because the issue and the challenge is not that we do not have the pool of people to work on transportation infrastructure. It is really getting them prepared and making sure they are qualified to work on this infrastructure. And in this career pathway, from sort of cradle to grave in terms of transportation infrastructure, our thought has been that we want to touch young people at an early age. Some of you are old enough to remember back in the day at our schools, we had vocational schools and we had woodcraft and auto mechanic and all of those things. We don't have that anymore. What we want to do and what we have begun to do at LA Metro that is tied to this career pathway approach is we are starting a transportation school, grades 6 to 12. We already have a solicitation on the street where we are selecting a consultant to help us start a school where people say, well, what does that have to do with putting buses and trains out? But as we build infrastructure in this country, if we do not prepare the next generation to build the infrastructure, we are in for, I believe, a national emergency. As transportation infrastructure and just infrastructure in general begins to deteriorate all over this country and the need to build more, we will be in a bad state as that infrastructure begins to deteriorate. We're creating a new middle class. When we talk about the transportation infrastructure that needs to be built and rebuilt in this country, we have an opportunity, first by helping to bring about a qualified workforce. We have an opportunity to create a new middle class for people with these great jobs that come with infrastructure build out. When I talked about growing up on the south side of Chicago and seeing people build infrastructure in my community that did not look like me, I would say that local hire has a place. It has a place in all of our communities around this country, especially communities of color and disadvantaged communities in every city in this country. And so local hire, even though the current administration has done away with the local hire program at the federal level, we will continue with local dollars to implement our local hire program. As we reach out to various communities and as we reach out to young people and get them into infrastructure type disciplines, women in non-traditional transportation roles become even more important. We have created, under the guidance of Metro's Deputy Executive Officer Stephanie Wiggins, who is here, a Women and Girls Council, not just for the employees at LA Metro, but how can we pave the way for women and girls in the transportation disciplines all over the county and all over the country. We believe that what we do in LA County can be a model for the rest of the country. And so starting a program that focuses on reaching out to women and girls becomes very, very important for us as we move forward to implement the largest infrastructure program in this country, which is Measure M. I mentioned that we have the Career Pathway Initiative. Well, let me say that this next generation of transportation careers and the transportation school that we are creating, all of this is serious business. Infrastructure is the next big thing. It's the next big thing. It's like the tech boom. Our infrastructure is deteriorating all over the country. 200 initiatives, as Salita was saying earlier, were successful last November. People at the local level are getting it that we have to build our infrastructure in this country, and they have gone to the polls and they have said that we want to invest in infrastructure for the long term. As we went out and educated the public and got ready for our November 8th ballot initiative last year, it was incredible that the no sunset provision, i.e. the tax never ends, that began to poll higher than the 50-year. Now, I don't know about the psychology of that, but people began to understand that infrastructure is important, and they went in for the long term. Every time I go to Washington, D.C. and talk to the feds, I get in trouble because I talk about a long-term transportation bill from the feds. We haven't had one. We've had 6 years, and we've had some extensions. In the local areas, we're talking at least 30 years. The feds are talking 6. Give me a long-term, a real long-term transportation bill in Washington. I talked about this idea of a socio-economic enabler, which is what transportation is. Transportation determines who gets to go to the best hospitals and doctors. Transportation decides who goes and how they go to the best schools in the city. Transportation decides what jobs people go to. We are more than just your grandfather's transportation agency. We are, of course, a mobility provider, but we're also this socio-economic enabler where we are enabling mobility for people that do not have it. The idea of creating transportation or transit-oriented communities is what I've sort of coined this. And it's not just TODs. People have said, well, hey, Phil, we are the T in TOD. Well, I argue that we're not just the T in TOD. Because as people are displaced in the various communities where we are building transportation infrastructure, as we gentrify people out, as we go in and start talking environmental at the front end of a project, and by the time the transportation line or whatever opens, that community we started talking to 5-6 years ago is not even there anymore. It's a whole different community. And so this idea of transit-oriented communities says that we are going to, yes, we're going to put our transportation asset there, i.e. a station or whatever, but we're going to work with the community to develop not just what we own there, but we want to leverage the property and the land around it that may be owned by the city or the county. How can we leverage that to make this a holistic approach to transit-oriented communities and work with the community on affordable housing, work with the community on a park or whatever to make sure and do what we can. We can't control everything with regard to gentrification, but how can we work with the community to limit the amount of displacement when a new asset comes into that community? That is what we're talking about. And the local hire piece and all of that goes with it. Food deserts and grocery stores that are not in our communities, by the mere fact that we're putting transportation infrastructure there, brings value. And so how do we make sure that community stays there? Other things, innovation, some of the things that we're working at Metro. We are the first major transit agency in the country to replace all of our diesel buses with a CNG fleet. This summer, the Metro Board directed us to move from that CNG fleet to 100% zero emission by 2030, which will make us the largest American transportation agency to endorse such a goal, to have an all-electric fleet. We've already ordered 100 electric buses to serve 2 of our bus rapid transit lines. So this idea of innovation, innovate or die is what they talk about in Silicon Valley. We have to learn to do that. We're thinking differently. We created an office of what I call extraordinary innovation. And I got to tell you this thing. I mean, I mentioned this when I first got to LA. I mentioned to someone I was going to start this office of extraordinary innovation, and they said, Phil, why the word extraordinary? And I said, I guess you won't be working in that office. But this idea of seeking out innovation, this idea of being less prescriptive in our specifications, even in RFPs, this idea of looking at a performance-based system and approach to tell the private sector, here is what we want, now go do it, without being prescriptive in telling them exactly how. We're starting a micro-transit pilot project, transit's version of Lyft or Uber, a curb-to-curb service that people can call. If you can't beat them, join them. And so we're transforming transportation. We're looking at things differently. We encourage every city here to begin to look at things differently. Mobility is our core mission, yes, but make no mistake about it, we impact communities in so many different ways with what we do. And so this idea of transforming communities, this idea of thinking differently, this idea of providing more options to people. People beat us up about ridership. Ridership is declining. I read about, it was in the paper today, about, I believe, the system here in Chicago, the ridership dip. This is a nationwide trend. What we have to remember is that ridership is but one performance metric. We should be thinking about all of the positive things we do in terms of mobility. And we should be looking at more metrics and not just pulling our hair out such that it is, pulling our hair out over the cyclical nature of the increase and decrease of ridership. And so our thought here is, as we provide and really concentrate on what I call the most important commodity that we have out there, which is time, how do we save time with regard to mobility? Now, we're out there building the largest public works program in the United States. We are keeping our eyes focused on the future as we prepare for 2 million more people to come to LA County over the next 40 years, and the many who will visit Los Angeles because of the 2028 Olympics. How can we streamline the process? How can we create even more mobility options for the residents of Los Angeles? And so the transportation revolution is here. I want to thank all of you for your work in this area. I think what we do, most people, a lot of folks don't understand it maybe, but we are making life easier for residents and people that depend on us every day. When you talk about the city of Chicago, 1.6 million rides a day, Los Angeles at 1.4, 1.3, 1.4. This is enhancing our communities. This is building more mobility options. We're better connecting communities, and we're giving ourselves back, again, one of life's most treasured commodities, and that is time. Thank you so much for having me, and go Dodgers.